to the cloud. I'm so pleased. If you can mute yourself in between, because it's a little distracting. Can you mute yourself? Or I'll just mute everybody. All right, so we're recording tonight, so you need to find how to hide yourself if you don't want to be on the recording. So that's the disclaimer. And I'm so very happy. This is our second in a series on media and democracy. We had media bias and propaganda last time. I see Jeff Cohen joining the call, which is great. Thanks, Jeff, for joining and being supportive to these three great speakers. And Jen Sanko of Brainwashing My Dad was also super, which is a great documentary film if you want to know about the effect of media on our democracy in a personal form, but also informative form. And Lee is here from Tucson. My name is Jennifer Carius. I'm the founder and director of Democracy Reform Ranking Project. And so thanks for those who are attending again. The mission of Democracy Reform Ranking Project is to engage, get, and keep people focused on democracy reform, to protect, honor, and expand the one person, one vote principle, to get the representation in government that we, the people in the United States, need. And our organization tries to be a catalyst organization and go where other organizations are not going. We're a grassroots engagement effort intended to get people involved in actions, although nonpartisan and educative in nature. We host the Democracy Survey, which is at thedemocracysurvey.org, our website. It's a 2-minute survey, please take it. And the Democracy Support Network. In fact, we're going to meet as the Democracy Support Network after this meeting and take some of the juicy ideas these speakers have and see if we can get some people to take some actions together. Our media landscape is very impactful on equity of the playing field, the implementation of the one person, one vote principle, and what it brings from theory into actuality. We have seen not just a rise of intensity of outright non-factual media posing itself as quote unquote news, but also more concerningly, we're experiencing a rapid and profound spread of such media, often by online platforms supported by advertising, and those large corporations doing digital advertising often don't even know that and that they are supporting non-factual propagandist information. And we're being taken over by megalithic, monolithic social media and online platforms like Facebook and Google and Twitter. This amidst an existing crisis, the massive decline of the number of journalists and news outlets exacerbated by COVID. And are we at the point of no return, Victor? So I think he's going to speak on this. And Sue and Chris, likely Victor, how shall we govern? At what level? And with what nuances due to these existing structural deficits in journalism, but also given the rapidly shifting environment brought on by this amazing freedom of movement associated with the digital media age, while respecting diversity and the voices of we the people. So these three speakers, I think, move our conversation from last time, a month ago, till this time. So thank you, get comfy. We'll stretch between speakers. You can put you can put your questions to the specific speaker in the chat. My advisory board member, Chris, will be organizing those questions for afterwards. And so we want audience participation at the end. So, and thank you so much for your donations, and it supports our organization's work and this series on media and democracy. So Victor, who's going to share now first, is a professor of media policy and political economy at the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg School for Communication. He also co-directs the Media Inequality and Change Center. And he's authored and edited 6 books, including America's Battle for Media Democracy, Will the Last Reporter Please Turn Out the Lights? Oh, excuse me, I misquoted that. Will the Last Reporter Please Turn Out the Lights? And then another, After Net Neutrality, and most recently, Democracy Without Journalism. So you're all ready to go and share, Victor. We're still getting in guests, but go ahead and welcome and thank you.
Great.
Hold on. Hold on.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to say something really quick before he starts. If we have time, can I have access to screen share so I can share the video, that YouTube video I just shared with you guys?
Yes, we can do that later on. In between, do you mind muting yourself so that Victor can get the screen for the video as well?
Yes, ma'am.
And put down your hand. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction. I want to thank the Democracy Reform Ranking Project for organizing this event, as well as my fellow panelists, and for you all to be joining us this evening. It's a really important discussion. We all have much at stake in this discussion. We all should be involved in these conversations about the future of our news media system. Can everyone see these slides? I'm sharing a few slides here. Excellent. Okay, great. I will be answering our rhetorical question, do we have a media crisis? I think we all would agree that we do, but I guess the question is what kind of crisis or crises? And I'm going to try to get into some of the structural root causes of these crises, as well as talk about opportunities, because as they say, every crisis is also an opportunity for creating something better. And much of my discussion this evening will be focused, I'll warn you, it's focused on a fairly doom and gloom narrative, but I will try to end on a more optimistic note to argue that actually something better could come out of this mess if we all get involved and imagine something entirely different. Much of what I'll be discussing comes out of this recent book that Jennifer mentioned, Democracy Without Journalism, another rhetorical question, because we all learn in school that you can't have democracy without a free and by implication functional press system. And yet, as we're sitting here now, our commercial media system, our journalism is rapidly collapsing, and we're dealing with all kinds of maladies that we need to try to confront. So that's what my discussion will be about. And, you know, I worked on this book for over a decade. Of course, these problems have been around for even much longer than that. I always turn to history to try to show, you know, much of what seems so new is actually quite old, including these structural crises that we're dealing with. But the final stage of writing this book was very much precipitated by events in 2015, 2016, and in particular, the election of this guy. Many of you, like myself, are probably trying to forget about him, but we actually should thank him, at least for one thing, which is he drew attention to many pre-existing conditions, some structural pathologies in our news and information systems. And I think because he drew attention to them, he actually created this moment, this crisis, where we can start thinking about changing the structures of our media system. And of course, this picture captures so much of what's wrong, the constant coverage of Trump in our media while he was running, and even while he was president, even as our media performed adversarial postures towards the president. Trump was money in the bank for these news organizations. Another a notorious quote that I'm sure all of you have heard from the now disgraced Les Moonves, the former CEO of CBS, when he was asked about this constant coverage. He said, "It may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS." Direct quote, damn good for CBS. I wanted to make that the title of my book, but my editor talked me out of it. But again, I think that captures so much of what's wrong in our media system, the driving commercial logic where at every turn, commercialism trumps democracy. The driving business model for all of our news media, all of our commercial news media, whether we're talking about Fox News or CNN or indeed Facebook, it's all about capturing our attention, capturing our eyes and ears and delivering them to advertisers for tremendous profits. And that's what's driving our media. I feel that too often we're sort of reacting to the symptoms of what's wrong, and we're not understanding the core problems that are driving this. And to understand those core roots gives us an idea of what we need to change to create a better system, a system that's actually driven by democratic imperatives, not profit imperatives. So to step back just for a moment to sort of do, big picture view of the American media system, what I refer to as American media exceptionalism, because our media system is actually quite different from most media systems around the world. Many media systems might be dealing with one or two of these problems that we're seeing here, but rarely do you have this perfect trifecta. And that is in many sectors of our news media system, it's dominated by a handful of corporations. To call them oligopolies is probably overly generous. We're really talking about duopolies or monopolies, where we're at the mercy of one or two major firms. And in many ways, this is the worst of all worlds, because not only are we at the mercy, we have no choice in our media consumption, or we're getting the same kinds of content thrown at us, but these firms are only lightly regulated. It'd be different if, we might have something what we used to call a natural monopoly, where it might make sense for one big telecommunications firm to control the network, but then there would be some kind of social contract where they're giving something back to society. Increasingly, we have very little of that left. You might remember something called the Fairness Doctrine. That was something that mandated, it was a public interest obligation that mandated that broadcasters cover controversial issues of local importance in a balanced manner. And of course, that was thrown out in 1987 during the Reagan administration. So there are very few public interest protections remaining. But I would say this last factor is probably the most consequential. That is that our media system is so hyper commercialized. There are only weak public alternatives. And I'm going to show one graph that I think really illustrates this. So this shows annual per capita expenditures on our public broadcasting. And you see that the US is literally almost off the chart for how little we allocate towards our public broadcasting per year. It comes out to about $1.35. So the price of a cheap cup of coffee. If you throw in local and state subsidies, you might get up to about $3.40. So now we're talking about a latte, perhaps. Compare that to what they spend in the UK for the BBC. It's about $100 per person per year. If you look at some of the Nordic countries, they're spending close to $200 per person per year. And the health of their public media systems really shows this. Of course, in the US, our public broadcasting station, or our corporations, and PBS and NPR in particular, are increasingly relying on what's euphemistically called enhanced underwriting from corporations, foundations, and even casual observers can see that increasingly there's very little difference between our public broadcasting and our commercial broadcasting. I would argue there's still some important difference, but it's starting to really, especially when you're hearing all these commercials and seeing them, it starts to really beg, the question, why do we even have this public broadcasting system? But that's because we keep it impoverished. We don't give it very much money from the federal government, and it doesn't have to be this way. And things have been getting worse. You might recall that Sesame Street was leased out to HBO. So now Big Bird and Elmo have gotten corporate. And of course, during the Trump administration, they were trying to phase out what little federal spending was still going towards our public media. So why does this matter? And I would argue that really, again, this is indicative of how commercialized our media system is. We really don't have public alternatives like most democratic countries do, but it also means that there really isn't a social safety net for when the market fails to support the level of journalism that democracy requires. And that's what I'm going to turn to next. I'm going to be talking from here on out about this local journalism crisis, which, it's in my view, this is all a symptom of this commercialism driving our media system, driving much of it into the ground. But this loss of local journalism in some ways is one of the biggest problems facing us. And it's the one that's not getting as much attention as some of these other problems are, like, for example, social media and even Fox News, which we should be paying attention to. But if we don't have local journalism, we really can't have a functional democracy. And many of you understand the root cause of this. But basically what has happened is that this 125-year business model, which relied on advertising revenues. So for example, our newspapers relied on about 80% of their revenues from advertisers. about 20% coming from reader support, whether it's subscriptions or newsstand sales. So this over-reliance on advertising really is the main reason for why the journalism crisis hit earlier and harder here in the US compared to other countries around the world. But it also changed the content. As soon as the press commercialized in the late 1800s, it really changed how publishers viewed their audiences. They saw us as consumers, not citizens. They saw us again as really, they needed to bait our attention. This is where the whole yellow journalism idea came into play. It was basically the clickbait of the late 1800s, early 1900s, trying to sell us, trying to deliver us to advertisers for handsome profits. And well into the early 2000s, the newspapers would deliver 20, 30% profit margins. They became tremendously profitable over the years. A lot of this was because a newspaper typically had a monopoly in its given market. If you wanted to advertise anything, there was nowhere else to go. This worked out very well for those who owned the press. It never really served democracy that well. But now that business model, as advertisers and readers have migrated to the web, that model has irreparably broken. It is irreparably broken. It's never coming back. And of course, what digital advertising revenue is generated is mostly going to, you could probably guess who, the big bad duopoly, Facebook and Google. So we're going to have to find alternatives. And what this means, with fewer advertising revenues, they've lost tens of billions of dollars over the last 20 years. It leads to fewer journalists. Newspapers are closing, declaring bankruptcy, going online only. I don't know, to go to Jennifer's question, are we at the point of no return? That's a very good question. Some people would say yes. I'm not going to give up on it yet. But thus far, there really has been no public policy response. This is a national crisis, and it's not received enough attention. That's slowly beginning to change. The pandemic, which accelerated the crisis, of course, is not the root cause, but it definitely drew attention to some of these problems. It raised awareness. People suddenly had this newfound appreciation for the press, as they did in the early years of the Trump administration. You had that so-called Trump bump that wasn't lasting for most news organizations. And these concerns, it's not just, it's not like, oh, too bad these newspapers are going away, but there are some real consequences for this. One is that they become increasingly degraded, and they start resorting to increasingly unsavory tactics to chase the ever elusive dissipating revenue streams, doing things like native advertising and behavioral tracking. This is where they're basically surveilling us. They're also doing this native advertising is basically where they blur the distinction between advertising content and news content, so that we're deceived into reading what's essentially corporate propaganda camouflaged as news stories. It also leads again to this loss of jobs, and not just fewer journalists, but lower paid journalists with fewer benefits. Increasingly, would-be journalists are going into PR and other areas. It's now something like for every 6 PR employees, there's 1 journalist. And we're also seeing the loss of particular kinds of reporting, the kind of we might refer to as public service journalism, stuff that focuses on local, international, investigative policy reporting, the stuff that's not always sexy, doesn't always sell advertising, but it's precisely that kind of journalism that costs money, that democracy needs, and it's rapidly disappearing. There's also this question of, what effects is it really having? And, some of this is fairly intuitive, but now we have all these natural experiments where we can see, what happens to a local community when the local newspaper shuts down. And study after study, now almost on a weekly basis, we're seeing this empirical evidence showing that when people don't have access to local news media, they tend to be less civically engaged. They're less likely to vote. Local governments are more corrupt. There's more mismanagement. There's also higher levels of polarization. As people lose their local news organizations, they increasingly turn to national news outlets, which whenever you hear the term polarization, that's really a misnomer. It's more about the radicalization of especially conservatives and people resorting to conspiracy theories. So that's what's happening as a direct or indirect, in some cases, effect of losing your local journalism. So what we learn in school is true. And also, we keep hearing this term news deserts, but this is a growing problem where across the country, hundreds of communities no longer have access to any local news media whatsoever. And this is disproportionately hurting rural communities, but also communities of color, many of whom never had access to reliable news media. We're never well served by the news media. There's always been this kind of informational redlining that's only gotten worse in recent years. And in terms of getting worse, I mean, since the early 2000s, we've seen well over 50%. It's now hovering close to 60% of our newsroom employees have lost their jobs. And we've all been hearing about, what's happening to various newspapers where they're just shells of their former selves. And of course, what's left is being scooped up by vulture capitalist firms like Alden Global Capital. So everything's being accelerated and driven into the ground. And it's a very dismal situation. But I will start getting into the what's to be done about this question. First, all this begs the question: what alternatives to the advertising revenue model are out there? What could we be doing instead? And way back, I think Jennifer mentioned this cheerfully titled book. Way back in 2011, Bob McChesney and I co-edited this book. We went out and canvassed leading journalists, activists, media critics, academics to talk about the nature of the journalism crisis and what we should do about it. And basically, alternatives fell into these 4 buckets. And the fact that they're still the same buckets that we're talking about today, I don't think speaks to how prescient we were all being. I think it really speaks to the structural nature of the problem. There really aren't that many alternatives to it. But also, I would agree, there's some degree of lack of imagination, lack of political will. But these 4 buckets, the first one's fairly intuitive. If advertisers are no longer paying for the journalism we need, then why shouldn't readers simply pay? Why shouldn't we just rely on subscriptions, paywalls, this terrible idea of micropayments that keeps coming back from the dead? Membership models will sometimes work, and this model might work for niche outlets. It works for the big 3 papers: Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, but it typically does not support even large metro papers, metro dailies, but also medium-sized community newspapers. It really does not generate enough revenue. Most newspapers don't have large enough readers. People are unwilling or unable to pay, which is another reason why the paywall model isn't ideal, because it starts blocking off. I mentioned redlining earlier. To start paywalling things makes that redlining problem even worse. This other bucket, citizen journalism or crowdsourcing, this was a little more prevalent in the early days of the utopian rhetoric around the internet. The internet was going to revolutionize society. That's faded somewhat. This idea of support from foundations and benevolent billionaires, which of course begs the observation that not all billionaires are benevolent. Some come with very pronounced political agendas. Yet in some cases, we can point to some great, Pierre Omidyar has supported some wonderful media outlets like The Intercept. We certainly hope that this hotel mogul rescues the Tribune papers from Alden Capital. So certainly there are worse outcomes, but at the very least, we can say that that's not a systemic fix. Even if foundations can save a newspaper here and there, create a new outlet here and there. And there are some wonderful exemplars out there, some amazing experiments that at least rely in part on that kind of revenue support, but that just doesn't provide this kind of baseline level of news and information for all Americans. And I really think that should be our objective. And that brings us to this last category that's the most politically fraught, even though we've always subsidized our media systems going back to the postal system in the late 1700s, but public media subsidies. When Americans hear that phrase, they drop into fetal positions. They think it's antithetical to core American freedoms, but really it's as American as apple pie. And here's moving into what's to be done. I mean, we really need to not just decommercialize our media, try to take it out of the market as much as possible, but also democratize it. So create public options ranging from vibrant public media centers that can be coming from already existing public broadcasting stations, or even converting post offices and libraries into community media centers. This also should include broadband municipal and community broadband networks, because we still have this crazy digital divide in the United States. It has to be part of the conversation. Breaking up monopolies is always a great thing to consider, to at least have that on the table, but we also have to be clear that some of these problems aren't simply monopoly problems, they're capitalism problems. We have to, again, decommercialize much of our media, perhaps regulate some of our news outlets, and we'll get into that discussion later. I'm not fully on board about bringing back the Fairness Doctrine, but that's something that can be we can talk about that at the very least. But more importantly, I think we have to make sure that the journalists themselves and local communities themselves own and control their own news media outlets. And there are various ways to pay for this. We could tax the platform monopolies like Facebook and Google. We can create a massive journalism trust. There's already some movement in that direction. And just, no one wants to spend a lot of time talking about tax law, tax policy, but there are ways to try to incentivize news organizations to transition into low and nonprofit outlets. We also have to keep talking about net neutrality. This is something that's dropped out of the conversation. I think it came up earlier in our discussions. I have another recent book out that focuses on this ongoing fight. We need to be ready for that. We need to fight the big bad monopolies. Here's a vampire squid that represents the monopolies. This is actually from around 1900 during the first Gilded Age, sort of a meme from that period. But I do think we can see this moment of growing scrutiny of especially of our social media monopolies, and Mark Zuckerberg in particular, who's always this perfect villain. But we can try to harness that growing criticism to think structurally, to think about alternatives, to reimagine what journalism could and should be. And I'm going to end on that cheerful note. I think I went a minute or two over. I apologize, but I look forward to our discussion. Thank you for listening.
Whoa, that was excellent. Thank you for that rigorous solutions section. And favorite word, precarity. So people are putting stuff in the chat already. You might want to take a little glimpse. You might all want to stand up and literally stretch just a second so that we really do have time. We have a small-ish group, so we can have more discussion this time. But thank you, Victor. That was well said, and thanks for the great slides. About Sue, who's going to speak next. She was also with us last time, and she's going to go a little more into detail about broadcast. She's a former Emmy-winning broadcast journalist turned media reformer. She has the Media Action Center, which forced Entercom to give up its $13.5 million license to operate KDND radio. And in 2018, her Media Action Center started a campaign against Alex Jones. And I don't know if you all know who he is, but it resulted in his program being taken off the air on stations around the US. And in 2020, Sue filed the amicus brief with the Supreme Court about the hidden consolidation in the local TV industry. And in 2021, she filed a complaint against the FCC and the DC Circuit Court of Appeals for failing to provide public documents related to the attempted Sinclair Tribune merger. Sue, welcome back. And for all the fighting you've been doing, so enlighten us, go ahead, and I'll assist where possible.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much for hosting these events. It's such a treat for me to be here with Victor Pickard and with Chris Lewis, all of you who have an interest in these topics. We're few and far between, but I think it's a growing audience. People know there's something wrong. And for the first time in all these years I've been doing this, I think that I'm seeing people have an interest, which is really wonderful. I want to talk today about owning our power. That's what's most important to me. And in order to change the media crisis dynamic, we've got to start at home. You've heard think nationally, act locally. I'm asking you to think locally and act locally, because as we've just talked about at length, local news is really where the crisis exists. So that's going to be the topic. To get started, let's think about ownership. Who owns the media? Let's think about who owns Facebook. Who owns Facebook? Mark Zuckerberg owns Facebook. Okay. Who owns Twitter? Jack Dorsey. He owns Twitter, right? You kind of know that. But who actually owns your local Channel 6? Who owns Channel 6 in your town? Or maybe you don't have a 6, maybe it's a 5 or a 7, but who owns that? Now, your minds are probably coming up with NBC or ABC or CBS, but no. You own Channel 6. That belongs to you. Those airwaves that ABC or CBS or Fox are broadcasting over belong to you. They are getting licenses to operate over your airwaves. It's kind of like driving a car, okay? You get a license to drive the car, but you drive along the public highways, and you have every reason to expect that you're going to get off at your off-ramp and be able to get to your house. So think about this for a moment. What would happen if one day you're driving to your off-ramp, but there's some corporation there and they're blocking the off-ramp, and they say, no, I'm sorry, but you can't get off at this off-ramp anymore because we're blocking it. That's what we're doing. Too bad for you. You'd get rather upset, wouldn't you? Because you fully understand that you own that highway. You are part of the public that owns that off-ramp. You'd be out there protesting. You'd be out there shouting. Well, it's exactly the same dynamic with broadcasting. And a lot of people say, oh, broadcasting, that's very old. Yeah, well, I'm kind of old. But broadcasting is still very much alive, and it is the one medium that we, the people, own. We have legal rights in broadcasting. The Supreme Court says that we have legal rights in broadcasting. And so it's very, very important that we start focusing on what we actually do own, because that's where our power lies. So own your power. Okay. Let's relate this idea now to local news. When there's a crisis in your town, what reporters show up to cover that crisis? Who do they work for? Typically, we may see a news reporter come out, newspaper reporter. We may see a radio reporter come out. We may see, though, more typically, local television reporters come out. And you know, you've seen this, you see the local TV trucks, right? Who are employing those people? Usually it's going to be your local TV stations with network affiliations. And this is going to get important in a minute. These are the larger stations that have NBC, CBS, Fox. Maybe you get local sports, or I'm sorry, national sports on those. You're going to get your big award shows on those stations. You're going to get your national nightly news. You're going to get, national programs that you like to watch. Those are the national TV affiliates. And they have more money coming in, and so they tend to be the TV stations that also provide more local news reporting. Now, a little background on me. I was a local news reporter in Los Angeles and in Sacramento. And I worked in one of these areas that Victor talked about, that, I worked in public policy. I did a series called You Paid For It, where we ferreted out government waste and held the government responsible to we the people. And that whole attitude kind of stuck with me, okay? And I'm telling you, I've got a nose for news, and I'm telling you right now, I'm on to one of the biggest stories of my entire life. And I want to share that with you all, because it involves all of us, and maybe, just maybe, you're going to be able to help, okay? And it's a story that's really been planned and executed for decades. Now, in January, the Supreme Court made a ruling in a case called FCC versus Prometheus Radio. And in that ruling, they decided that it would be okay for the Federal Communications Commission to pass a rule that says in one local town, one big mega corporation could own 2 local network affiliate stations, plus additional 1 or 2 more non-network affiliate stations, plus 8 radio stations, and the local newspaper. Now, when we start thinking about who are the reporters coming out to cover the stories and who do they work for, we could literally be looking at a situation where in one town, there's really only one local reporter who will come out. And whatever that station chooses to tell you is what you are going to hear. That is dangerous. That is a threat to democracy, okay? Now, this did not happen overnight. And Jennifer, I want you to get ready with this first YouTube clip. This happened over the course of many years. This started back in 2003 when George Bush was president and a man named Michael Powell was the chair of the Federal Communications Commission. Let's see how this rolled out. This will take about 3.5 minutes.
Which Bush are you referring to? Which George Bush? There were 2 in office.
W. Bush.
Okay. Unless you got,
Prometheus.
unless you got closed captioning on that thing, there's no way we can understand what the.
It's not playing at this point. This should be rolling. This is a rolling video. Can you hit play, Jennifer?
It is playing, but it's not, there's no audio.
Jennifer, check the sound icon at the bottom.
Yeah, because we should have seen the video doesn't stay on that shot either. It rolls from there.
Sue, we were seeing it rolling, just we weren't getting any audio.
Oh, in my screen, I couldn't even see it rolling. Okay.
Same here.
Maybe, Jennifer, it's because you're muted. Perhaps you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry, I've done everything technically wrong. This does not normally happen. Is this the correct video? Is this
Yes.
the correct video? Okay, excuse me for the delay. I messed up a number of things and I'm a little tired, sorry. I'm gonna share it with the audio from the computer. Excuse me. All right, one more time.
5 commissioners head the FCC. The president chooses 3 from his own party and 2 from the opposing party. It was President Bush who set the agenda through 2008. In 2003, Bush appointee Michael Powell tried to consolidate the media even further.
And wrote rules that match the times.
If they got away with what they wanted to do, you can end up in a community where you have one large corporation owning the daily newspaper, radio stations, television stations, the cable outlet in one community.
Their profits would go through the roof. I mean, they could strip down to one newsroom without any competition.
Now you tell me that that sounds like democracy.
It didn't look good. 3 of the 5 members of the FCC were Republican. They were all pretty much on the record as saying, even before we consider any evidence, we want to get rid of these rules. I mean, they'd gotten their marching orders.
But the public found out and rose up against the new rules.
We understand we got about 3 million people to weigh into the FCC. That's almost, 1 in every 100 Americans. I didn't even think that many people knew there was an FCC, let alone how to get their information to us, but they did. They were really concerned about this.
Powell's FCC approved consolidation anyway.
I believe we did our job, and I believe we did it well.
But grassroots media reform activists had a surprise for him.
So when the FCC clearly didn't listen to the American public, we knew that it was our time to act. And so with the Media Access Project and many other plaintiffs who joined onto our case, we told the FCC that we would sue them, and we took it all the way to the 3rd District Court of Appeals in Philadelphia.
The Court of Appeals in Philadelphia reversed the FCC's decision and directed it to conduct a do-over.
That do-over meant the FCC had to hold more public hearings about consolidation. They held 6 between October 2006 and November 2007. Democrats and Republicans joined in opposition to more consolidated media.
But a competitor can start a local bank or a restaurant. You just can't go in and start a radio or TV station because the airwaves are finite. And not only are they finite, they're owned not by the seller, but by the people.
But on December 18th, 2007, the Republican members of the FCC voted to allow broadcasters and newspapers in the same town to have the same owner.
Allowing cross-ownership may help to forestall the erosion in local news coverage by enabling companies to share these local news gathering costs across multiple media platforms. Today's order amends the 32-year-old absolute ban on newspaper broadcast cross-ownership.
Last time the Commission went down this road, the majority heard and felt the outrage of millions of citizens in Congress and then the court.
And they're hearing from citizens once again. There's a new lawsuit from Prometheus Radio and Media Access Project and a resolution to disapprove the FCC vote by the U.S. Senate.
We have visited this issue previously. I think there is too much concentration in the media, and the FCC rule moves in exactly the wrong direction, adding more concentration.
Preventing more media consolidation is a bipartisan effort.
Hey, look, this is not a partisan issue.
We had multiple votes on both sides of the aisle in the Commerce Committee when this was last discussed, so there were people on the Republican side and the Democratic side that
It's not a partisan issue at all.
So this is and was, there was a bipartisan aspect to this. And just recently I was on a call, the House Subcommittee on Disinformation had a call, and one thing I kept hearing was that Republicans and Democrats alike are going, what do we do about local news? So I'm hopeful that there can be some bipartisanship on this as well. However, one of the things we're seeing too is that when the FCC is governed by a Republican president, they tend to go toward very loose consolidation rules. When it's in Democratic hands, it tends to go toward we the people. The problem being, of course, right now, we have a Democrat in charge, and Jessica Rosenworcel is the acting chair, and I think she's wonderful. But the next time we get a Republican in charge, these rules are going to go back into place in a very big way. These rules are intact right now. And part of the thing I have to say, too, about the FCC very quickly is that the Supreme Court said that there was really no data that had been presented to the court that showed why these rules should not go through. I just said that wrong. The Supreme Court said that that there was no data provided to the FCC. Now, the FCC used to do its own studies. And Jennifer, let's see that slide that we have. This again was, and people are asking where that clip was from, the movie Broadcast Blues. If you look up Sue Wilson Broadcast Blues, you will find that. Notice this, September 2002, this is a working paper from the Federal Communications Commission itself, okay? And if we can see the second slide on that, they were really looking in depth at how many profits that the TV stations were making. I don't know if we have that. If we don't, I will just tell you. I mean, in Los Angeles, in the top 10 TV markets in the country, they were making as much as 46% profit. Now, this was a study the FCC put out itself. These days, they're not doing that. And in fact, one of the lawyers in the FCC Prometheus case, Cheryl Lianza, wrote that the sparse record is the FCC's own fault. Any analysis of this question of media ownership must rely on the FCC's data. However, the FCC has long permitted broadcast licensees to avoid filing their ownership data. It goes back to the idea that we, the people, own these airwaves. We own the airwaves, and the TV and radio stations actually have to report back to us. We'll be getting into that in just a minute, but I think we can lose the slide at this point, okay? Here's the story, folks, that I really discovered. Oh, there you can see the 46% profit at the very top. They were were making big dollars, and it's not that long ago. We don't know for sure how much they're making. Perhaps there's reports available I'm not aware of, but I was unable to find anything at FCC. All right, so I kind of stumbled into this story. I was doing a story about Sinclair Broadcasting when this whole Supreme Court case got on the desk, when I even realized that there was a Supreme Court case. What I have found since is that even though these FCC rules have just now formally been approved, over several years, TV companies have been snapping up local TV broadcast stations. Media Action Center did a study. We put an amicus brief out into the FCC versus Prometheus case. What we were able to discern very quickly was that there's about 70 communities right now, the top 5 TV groups already have more than one network station affiliate, okay? There's about 70 communities where they may have an NBC and a Fox station, or a CBS and an ABC station. The big promise that they made to the FCC in saying we need this rule was that if you let us have more than one station, we will be able to provide better and more news coverage. Well, the dirty little secret that we discovered in our research is that they're not providing more and better news coverage. They're sending one reporter out to do one story and then duplicating that same story all across the stations that they have. And sometimes it's more than just 2. Sometimes we discovered some groups like Sinclair have as many as 4 local stations in a local market. So we are subjecting the markets to whatever they want to tell us. Since this information started to come out, since I did this last wonderful event with Jennifer Carius, since I've been on a radio show, I've been hearing from people around the country that are saying they have been seeing for many years 3 of their network affiliates are under the control of one group. I heard from somebody in Santa Barbara that ABC, CBS, and Fox, local network affiliates, are operated by a company called NPG of California. Who is NPG of California? I have no idea. But what I can tell you, this is going on beneath the surface. And I don't know how deep it goes. What I do know is we need a study. I'm hoping to find somebody who can partner with me to do such a study, because without knowing what's really going on the ground, it's very difficult to then try to parlay this into the kind of legislation that we really need to prevent it from happening. But I can tell you the house is on fire and we need to do this now. I'm also hearing that a lot of mid-sized communities are saying they used to have local television stations in their area. They no longer do. They're hearing from, areas like Minneapolis, which are 150 miles away. They're no longer getting local news in their community. Here's something else. We're talking about these 5 station groups. There's a station group that was very small when I did this study a few months ago. Gray TV has now become the 2nd largest TV company, according to The Hill. And in The Hill report, it reads, Nexstar is the largest U.S. broadcast company, with stations in 116 markets, serving nearly 62% of the United States television broadcast households, according to its website. Okay, here's what you all don't know. The Communications Act says that one TV station group can only reach 39% of television viewers. And they put that cap at 39% so that there would be plenty of competition and plenty of opportunity for various news sources to be provided to we the people. Why does Nexstar already reach 62% of the public? Where is the Federal Communications? They're supposed to be the cops on the beat. They're ignoring this, and I don't think that the Congress actually is aware of this at this point. But that's the kind of stuff that we've been coming up with. So now let me take a few minutes to talk to you about what perhaps we can do about this. I've talked a little about the need for a study. Let's talk about Congress, because my view of the Federal Communications Commission is it's constantly a ping pong tournament. When the Democrats have control of it, they go in one direction. When the Republicans have control of it, they go in another direction. I am advocating that Congress get involved and start legislating especially at the local level, and maybe just use that 39%. That is already the cap we have for national, how many stations one company can have nationally. Perhaps one station group can have 39% of the media given town to allow 71% to be held by somebody else. That's one idea, but I really would like to see some legislation here. Here's something else that I want to bring this home to us, because again, think locally, act locally. I'm going to tell you success stories that we have had acting locally and things that you can do in your hometowns. Now, believe it or not, and I know in this digital age, this sounds crazy, but getting a meeting personally with your local station manager and news director at your radio or TV stations can have impact. Here's what we've been able to do in Sacramento. There was a little group, Sacramento Media Group. Everybody thought we were a big group, but we were only 8 people, but we won't have to tell everybody that, all right? But we would make, we would have meetings, and we went to the local television stations and asked, oh, you have to develop a very simple ask, okay? Form a group, give yourself a name, and come up with what do you want? We would go to the local stations and say, we would like to see during the 60 days before an election, we would like to see 5 minutes of local coverage about campaigns, about election issues. The very first time we went in, the TV stations kind of thought, oh, aren't they just so cute, and brushed us aside. Now phase 2 of this, we took notes of what were said in those meetings. We publicized those notes. In one case, the Sacramento Bee publicized this. Oh, that was terribly embarrassing for the TV stations. TV stations don't like to be embarrassed. 2 years later, we went back to the TV stations. This time, the ABC affiliate in Sacramento said, yes, we will give you your 5 minutes. The rest of them brushed us off. What did we do? We wrote another scathing report about how these TV stations won't provide even 5 minutes of local election coverage during 60 days prior to an election. The third time we went, now count this, this is over the course of 4 years, really. Little more than 4 years it took. But the third time, we struck gold. Every single local TV station said, okay, you can have your 5 minutes. Now that's a very small ask, but that is a success. And I want to show you that you can have success when you do this. We had success in Sacramento going to our local radio stations. We went to them asking that more progressive views be aired. Okay, they didn't want to do that. We also asked that they start putting their public files online. I've talked a little bit about public files. The broadcast stations have to report to us because we own the airwaves. We are the bosses. They don't want you to know that, but they are. We did a little action called Occupy Clear Channel. This was during the Occupy times. In fact, the people are somebody here from Wisconsin. Let's see, we had people going into radio stations in Sacramento, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Milwaukee, Madison, Saratoga, Jacksonville, and West Palm Beach, all on the same day. Just to very simply say, we're here to inspect your files. Clear Channel got kind of freaked out about that. They weren't so sure that they really wanted to have all these people coming in at will to see their files. Most people didn't know we had the right to do that, but we taught them, and of course we do. As a result of that action, guess what? The radio station started to say, okay, yeah, we'll put the public files online like you've been wanting us to do for years. This is the kind of impact when you start thinking about your local community, okay? One last thing. Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Yes, this last thing, we're heading on to 8 and going on to Chris pretty soon.
One last thing, we have had success with people writing letters to their local radio stations where Alex Jones actually airs. Now, again, I started this in Sacramento, got an op-ed placed in the Sacramento Bee. Within a week, Alex Jones was off the air here in Sacramento. But I can't do this for you who are in Madison. I can't do this for you who are in Ithaca. You own your local stations where you live. I don't own them in Ithaca or in Madison. I own them in Sacramento. That's where I live. If you go to Media Action Center website, you'll find a list. Just know that you do have the power to do this. And going back to this, to change the media crisis dynamic, We must start at home. Think locally, act locally, and preserve what is yours. Thank you.
Thanks so much for keeping that local power is in our hands. Piece of this, Sue is available, will be available and contactable after this. And for those who had questions, we're doing the questions at the end. I'm sorry I didn't explain that before. And so do stretch your body because it really does help with the attention. And we do want to have a conversation. I want to introduce Christopher Lewis because it's really also wonderful that you could be here in your busy life with kids and school board and being the CEO of and president of Public Knowledge. You have brought 20 years of experience in policy making and political activism to this role in Public Knowledge. And before that, you were in the Federal Communications Commission Office of Legislative Affairs. So yes, that's very, you have a lot of knowledge to share with the regulating body that's pertinent here. You worked for Senator Ted Kennedy's office, as well as President Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. You told me during the network session that you're going to be presenting at a hearing on broadband and equity. So we definitely do want to tie these matters into equity. Please share with us what you've prepared for us today. I'm so excited to have you with us.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be on here with Victor and Sue. I really enjoyed their presentations. And I know we want to get to conversations, and folks have been so attentive that I will try to give some thoughts here as quickly as possible. And I'm also going to do it with some slides, but really excited because, I'm going to try with these slides, there's going to be some overlap because I work at Public Knowledge. We cover a lot of issues, but we really do, I think we're a good complement for this conversation with Victor and Sue, because not only is he in academia and Sue's out here doing all this great activism work, we're really in the Washington policy conversation. That's what we do at Public Knowledge. And so I think we bring a different perspective, and we also do so much on technology policy. And so while I agree with a lot of what they had to say about what's happening in the media landscape, I want to talk a bit about how that connects to what's happening in technology as well. So I'm going to share some slides here and talk through them a bit. First of all, as I said, Public Knowledge, Washington-based public interest advocacy group. It's our 20th anniversary this year, so check us out online. We're doing our best to continue to fight the good fight for digital rights and make sure that, as our mission says, we promote free expression online, an open internet. So net neutrality, yes, is one of our major issues, as well as affordable access and equitable access to communications tools and creative works. And so when we talk about that, that's often brought us to tech policy, but it can also bring us to where media and tech policy overlap. And so with this question, do we have a media crisis? I agree with Victor's answer that the answer is yes, but I took a little different provocative spin on it, because another way of saying it from a tech perspective, make sure I can, I'm having trouble advancing the slides here. Let me see.
You might have to go down to the arrows on the bottom left of your slideshow, because I've had that in Zoom as well. Can you get it?
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
It wasn't the button I thought it was, but this will work. So I wrote the provocative answer that, well, no, it's not exactly a crisis. I think it's a media revolution, and it's largely right now, but not exclusively, being driven by tech innovation. The market has changed, and I think we heard some of that in Victor's comments, so I'll touch on it a bit. But when you have a revolution, when the market changes the way it did, whether it's in advertising or in other business models, it's not always clear who holds power. And I agree with a lot of what Sue had to say about power dynamics, and especially the history of the rules of media. When you have a revolution, you don't know what the rules will be and how you change them. And how you change those rules should be based on clear values. And so, as we talk through this, I want to keep coming back to who holds what power as we describe this media revolution and what I think is driving it. And also, what rules there should be and driven by what values. And when we talk about media, I think part of the revolution is that media is changing. There's traditional media, broadcast, radio, newspapers, and then there's this newer form of media that's interactive, that's distributed and more democratic over broadband and on internet platforms. I believe that internet platforms are media. And so as media changes and as new types of media like digital platforms are created, and there's many different types of digital platforms. We've heard Facebook mentioned, we've heard Google mentioned, but there's all different types. We need to adjust the rules based on our core values. So let's take a look at what I think the three drivers are of this media revolution. And this is where we'll get some overlap. But three drivers I wanted to focus in on are the traditional media consolidation that we're seeing in the marketplace. I want to talk about digital platforms and how they work and how they impact this media revolution. And I also want to make sure that we don't forget, and this is important coming from a public interest group like Public Knowledge, that we certainly want to center the voices of users of the media. And one of the major drivers is the change that the internet has brought to democratic speech with a small d, but democratic speech on what I describe here as unlimited channels, because the internet really does provide unlimited channels based on its structure and how it works. And again, key question, how do these drivers impact power, rules, and values? So first, let's look at traditional media consolidation, and I'll try not to overlap. Let's see. Oh, here we go. It jumped. There we go. Oh, it's jumping ahead. I can't seem to control the slides.
Did you ever find those bottom arrows? Because they also have a back arrow.
I don't see any arrows.
You have to select.
Usually they're on the bottom left corner.
Yeah, there are no arrows. I don't know why.
You have to put, so why don't you unshare your screen and then go back in where you need it?
Sorry for that, folks.
That's okay. This is going beautifully. I had to take a screenshot of your slide already. I can't wait for you to share it.
Okay. We'll get back in it and hopefully I can get this to work. All right, let's try this again. Okay. And maybe it's easier even if I could just leave it in this. Can you guys see the slides okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not as big if I don't put it full screen on my screen. So, well, I'll try and make this work. It's easier.
This is totally fun.
Perfect, great. So traditional media consolidation, one of the three drivers I wanted to talk about, and I thought we got a lot of this from Sue, so I don't want to overlap too much, but I agree with Victor about the, first of all, the advertising model has been threatened, and he talked about how much of the revenue for traditional media, broadcast included, I'd say, but also newspapers, comes from the advertising model. It's often talked about lately how this is threatened by Facebook and Google, who do dominate the online advertising market, but I think it's worth noting that this threat has been coming for years, and we heard the same concerns, not only when cable came along and created more channels and more opportunities for showing advertising, but certainly when Craigslist came along. Imagine Craigslist coming along, and all of a sudden the driver of revenue that was the classified ads simply goes away. Because your newspaper isn't the place where you go to find classifieds anymore. You can find them online with Craigslist or with an eBay or other online marketplaces to find goods and services. So even before we had data-driven dominant digital platforms, there were threats to the advertising model of traditional media. We heard a lot from Sue about the acquisitions of local news outlets and mergers that were allowed to go through in multiple bipartisan administrations. And I think there's work to do to make sure that that doesn't happen. Joint sales agreements is another area of policy that we've seen where the government really went along with the trend towards traditional media consolidation. These are agreements between broadcasters. So while they can claim separate ownership, they have been allowed by Washington to enter these joint sales agreements to where they can leverage and negotiate together in a media market, and it almost combines their back end advertising and marketing offices, and it's like you're bringing them together in a merger without necessarily creating cross ownership. And then, of course, the broadcast cross ownership rules that we saw the video about also went away, and we look forward to where the Prometheus case takes us. Hopefully, there will be action at the FCC and Congress, like Sue said, to really address those ownership rules. I would also add, one more thing about the traditional media marketplace is that we've continued to see some of the ownership, the new ownership in private capital and investor conglomerates owning local media outlets. They really seem to value profit more than journalism. They're not, owners are not coming out of the traditional journalism schools and coming up through the business. And so their value set looks a lot like we see on social media in some ways, where they are driven by views and how can you maximize profit. And so it has led to devaluing local content and trying to figure out how to keep eyeballs on their screens. That's what we're seeing in social media. In traditional media, that can also mean promoting things that aren't necessarily true. And because they own multiple local outlets, they can promote it widely. And this is the story that we've seen with Sinclair, that there's story after story of Sinclair owning multiple local channels and being able to put out disinformation in local markets in ways that certainly might scare folks or draw attention to their news stories, but are not completely accurate. So we've really lost some of the values of traditional journalism that we've had in the past. The second driver I want to talk about is these large digital platforms. And this is where we do a lot of work at Public Knowledge, looking at the market for digital platforms and the nature of digital platforms. And in our writing and in our studies, we've really come to describe how dominant digital platforms have tremendous network effects. And by network effects, we mean that when you sign up to a platform like a Facebook or Twitter, because the platforms are interactive, because it's not broadcast, one to many like traditional TV, that interactive nature of the platform makes the value of the platform go up as the network, the number of people on the platform increases. So we've seen network effects in the past in traditional media on cable, but the network effects are so much larger when you have that interactive, many-to-many communication that we see on a Twitter or on a Facebook. And it leads to, because those network effects are so powerful, it can lead to kind of a race to monopoly rather than a race to just getting a piece of the market share like you would in a cable context. That race to monopoly has driven the dominant digital platforms to also take on the traditional drive towards consolidation that we saw in the old media marketplace. The biggest examples are Facebook buying up Instagram, or Facebook buying up WhatsApp to head off competitors that they see coming down the pipe, because they want to continue to leverage their powerful network effects to drive towards monopoly. Having a piece of the market share is not enough. If with network effects, if your friends are on a network, you want to be on that network, and there are real costs to the user and to small businesses as well from being excluded from that dominant digital platform. The costs are huge. If you choose not to be on a Facebook and go to a competitor social media platform, and your friends don't, then you don't have the ability to interact with them. And so, those network effects are strong. They lend the marketplace for digital platforms towards monopoly, and they need to be counteracted. We've also seen smaller acquisitions that aren't as high profile as the Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp acquisitions. You see, and the companies have admitted this, you see companies buying up small entrepreneurial startups because they have a great idea. And so no longer do you see startups in the tech sector trying to come up with a great idea and build it up to where they can turn a profit, but instead their business models are driven by their investors, where they want to build a product that could be bought up by a Facebook or an Amazon or a Google. And that's not healthy for competition, for that to be the dominant business model in the tech sector. And it's also not healthy for consumers to have choices. And just like we've seen with the hands-off approach around traditional media, up until recently, government has largely taken a hands-off approach to new digital platforms and technology. And there's some understandable reasons why, perhaps, in the early first decade of the internet, but we're really 25 years now into broadband, high-speed broadband, and the digital platforms online. And so it's really important that we start to think about, again, what power do they have, and what the rules should be around regulating these dominant digital platforms. And so we're excited that the House Antitrust Subcommittee, had an extensive investigation last year, led to a number of recommendations, and hopefully it'll lead to legislation to not have a completely deregulatory or hands-off approach to digital platforms, but to have some values-driven rules, as well as rules that promote competition. So hopefully that'll be something we'll see in the future. The last driver that I want to talk about, again, I want to make sure that we don't forget the importance of the user, because there are positive things that are happening as well as negative things around users of the internet and users of digital platforms these days. First of all, the internet is a powerful place for democratic speech. Again, democratic speech with a small d, the idea that it gives a low barrier of entry to independent and marginalized voices. And we shouldn't discount the importance of that. And I think that's something we want to continue to promote and preserve. Before the internet, with broadcast TV or radio, there were a limited number of places where you could speak up. And you had to go through those gatekeepers of whoever owned a channel, or I guess the proper way to say it, as Sue would put it, whoever had the license for the airwaves to own a channel and to broadcast. Still, there's only limited spectrum for that to get out, and so there was only so many channels you could have, and that meant only mainstream, largely content was put out there. And if you had an outside-the-box idea, or if you came from a marginalized community, especially Black and Brown communities, it was harder to be seen on traditional media. The internet has changed that, and I think that's something we want to preserve. Certainly, there are great examples that people love to celebrate. Issa Rae, who had a web show called Awkward Black Girl, which became so popular, and on YouTube, she was able to parlay that into having a TV show that she'd written and starred in on HBO, called Insecure, if you're familiar with it. There are great stories about people who have blown up like she has, and now she's doing extremely well. But there's also people who can make a living because the internet allows them to control the tools of production and to market themselves without having to go through those gatekeepers. And so that's a tremendous thing, and we want to continue to promote that. We also, have not only democratized speech, but we get real-time interactive communications, and that brings challenges. It brings the challenges of content moderation. It brings the challenges of now disinformation spreading online as people have figured out how to leverage their voices, and often to do it and speak online in a way that is anonymous, or using technology tools such as bots. And so these are some of the downsides to democratic speech, where anyone can quickly put up a website or to post on a platform. And so we need to see that counteracted. And then also, because of the high volume of posting and the interactive communications that we see online, we see the increased use of algorithms by dominant platforms and even small platforms as well. They use algorithms to do their content moderation. They use algorithms to steer you towards recommended content. And we want to make sure that those use of algorithms are fair, that they don't just support the mission of the platform to turn a profit, but they take into account certain important values such as truth, fighting disinformation, as well as equity concerns as well. So these are all driving the media marketplace. These are some of the conversations that we're having about these drivers. And so as we look at them, I want to come back to what are some key values that are important to think about as this revolution goes on, because without rules, we can't rein in the power of dominant digital platforms and their impact on traditional media as well as journalism. I don't know if we can necessarily change the marketplace for journalism, but hopefully we can create new rules and regulations that protect and preserve what we want to keep out of quality journalism, but also protect and preserve what we want to keep out of the benefits of the internet. So here's a few, and I have an asterisk by one because 5 of these are ones that we talk about at Public Knowledge. And then the 5th one I just added on, which is not from Public Knowledge, but it's kind of my own thought, and I think it factors in. One is competition. If we can have policies that promote competition, give more choices for users, and that means on the internet, more channels and more outlets for people to speak. So if you don't like the choices made, say, be it in content moderation or perhaps in privacy or data collection or other variables, you can move to other options online. We also want to preserve localism. This is a term that we hear about when we talk about traditional media, certainly in local news reporting, and we need to find ways to promote localism in an interactive online world as well. We want to promote free expression. We don't want to lose the democratic speech that the internet has fostered. And so we have to balance that against some of these other values. And then due process. When we see content moderated online, or when we see platforms choose who to promote, either with their algorithms and search, or other choices, depending on how the platform is structured, we want to make sure that those rules are clear, and that if you want to appeal them, that you have an outlet to do so. And we think clear due process rules are important on platforms to promote fairness, and that you know who you can call before you choose to go to another competitor. I think that it's equally important along with competition. And then lastly, truth. We see so many outlets fighting disinformation these days, and I don't know that there's one silver bullet for disinformation, but it's important that we try an all of the above approach, I think, to try and fight disinformation. And so we've got one idea that we're promoting, and I'll talk about in a second, but we need to continue to find different ways to promote truth, and to make sure that authoritative sources are lifted up for folks, and hopefully traditional media and the press can be a part of lifting up the truth and have an important role as an authoritative source. There are studies out there that show that the most trusted media is your local media, if you still have local media, and we think there's a role for folks there. And then I'll just say morality. We don't really deal in morality as a core policy value, but I wanted to mention it here because there are continued concerns being raised by some of our peers in public interest community around hate speech online, around equity, and making sure that folks have their voices heard on dominant digital platforms. And so we need to be clear about when we want to take a moral stance and how do we speak up about that. We may not be able to legislate around morality, but we need to make sure we're finding ways to push for kind of societal and community standards that can have effect and take effect online in the right ways. We saw this in traditional media, say in TV rating systems, movie rating systems, but we haven't yet seen accepted ways to fight for quality or safe spaces online in the same way that we have in traditional media. And so I think that's a growth area for us as a society, and a hard one when you have free expression and unlimited voices out there. So one last slide, just to talk a bit about some of the policies that we're looking at public knowledge. Again, these are not silver bullets, but I think when you think about some of these values, there are a few things that we're pushing for and talking about. There's a discussion around antitrust reform to promote competition. You hear about folks wanting to break up big tech and platforms. We don't think antitrust is enough, but you can certainly use antitrust to break down the power of big tech. We think you also need regulatory power. We see it at the FCC in the broadband space and in traditional media space. We think there also needs to be a regulatory body for digital platforms that can promote pro-competition rules like interoperability, the ability to use multiple social media platforms or to communicate across them is the simplest way of thinking about interoperability, in the same way that email and phones are interoperable systems that work no matter who you are using as a provider. We want to see non-discrimination rules that promote competition as well, that make sure that the dominant digital platforms aren't edging out competitors or nascent competitors, companies that may challenge them in the future, or other forms of anti-competitive practices, depending on how their platform is set up or structured to work. And then also algorithmic oversight and accountability to make sure that there's equity and fairness in algorithmic decision making. These are all, algorithms are on the back end and the users don't really get to see the algorithms. But it would be great if there was a government agency that had the authority to go into the black box and see that algorithms are created fairly and that they don't contribute to any competitive practices. Localism, I agree with Sue about the ownership rules are tremendously important. And I also agree with Victor that we want to try to find ways to promote journalism and quality journalism on the local level as a public interest value. Free expression, there's a lot of talk around Section 230 from the Communications Act. That is a law that promotes content moderation by providing liability protection for a platform so that if it chooses to moderate in a certain way, that it's not held liable for third-party content, meaning what you as a user post online. I think that's an important protection to promote free expression. There's a lot of discussion around repealing that. We think that's problematic. But if there are efforts to reform Section 230, we want it to be done in a way that continues to allow and promote content moderation and promote the free expression of individuals. We also don't want to lose the right and the power to share links or to share content. And we don't want new copyrights created that prevent that and put a price on linking to something. that would really put a chilling effect on the interactive nature of the internet. I've mentioned due process, transparency, and accountability are really important to having fair content moderation and fair rules on dominant digital platforms. There's a PACT Act, there's a bipartisan bill in the Senate right now that that's interesting and that promotes transparency and accountability. And so I think it's worth looking at. Around the value of truth, we have an idea around fighting disinformation called the Super Fund for the Internet. And this would take money from, create a market mechanism to take money from digital platforms, dominant digital platforms, and have it invested back in as a revenue source for local and investigative journalism, so that it sets them up as fact checkers and authoritative sources, since that's a skill set that journalists have. Hopefully, it could be considered as one option for a new way to create revenue for struggling journalist outlets. And there's other proposals out there to promote truth online. The Honest Ads Act is one around advertising, and we need to continue to come up with others that promote trust. And I think, when it comes to morality, right now the power, to moderate content is with the platforms. There's really only 3 places that I see right now where you can put the power or to decide what is posted online and what is not posted online. The platform probably makes the most sense right now because of our First Amendment. If you have the government getting involved with what is said and what is not allowed to be said online, I think that's a dangerous precedent to set. And so our hope is that by promoting competition, by promoting due process, by fighting disinformation with various methods, and also by demanding better oversight and content management, content moderation by the platforms, we can continue to create safe spaces for everyone to interact online. There could always be outliers because there are infinite channels on the internet. There could always be outliers and places where you could have content where they choose not to moderate. Think of a Parler or somewhere where we've seen white supremacists and hate speech, posted without any sort of moderation. But if we're able to promote competition, if we're able to promote algorithmic oversight, hopefully the dominant digital platforms at least can be preserved as safe spaces for everyone to interact without coming across bullying or hate speech or disinformation. And if a platform like Parler chooses not to moderate their content for disinformation or for hate speech, the choices in the marketplace and pro-competition rules can be set up in a way that people make those choices based on those moderation practices. And I think it's we're trying to come up with proposals here at Public Knowledge that don't run up against the First Amendment. It's a difficult thing when the internet is so interactive and communication works in real time and at such a high volume. But these are some of the ideas we have, and we're excited that Congress is looking at many and a lot of these, and hopefully others, to make sure that when we look at the internet and we look at media and this revolution and how it's changing how people interact and communicate with each other, that there's a public interest rooting in these laws and in these regulations. So this is something I feel like is just starting. Like I said, we haven't seen much regulation, or really no regulation, of digital platforms. At the same time, we've seen hands-off of traditional media. This is something we need to change. I'll close with an anecdote. I was talking with some students about Facebook, and in the conversation, the student said, I don't think that we can govern Facebook. I think it's ungovernable. They're too big and they're too powerful. And to me, that's a hopeless attitude. I believe that, whether it's because of the fact that, traditional broadcasts, we own the airwaves, or simply because we, the people, believe that there are public interest values that need to be preserved, we need to demand that our representative government protects us online. And just because a company is big and powerful doesn't mean we can't recreate rules and regulations around them. We've done it before. We've done it with traditional media and with telephone. There are rules that people take for granted in the old telecommunications world that protect consumers based on a public interest standard and public interest values at the FCC. When we talk about having a digital regulator for digital platforms, we should center those around public interest values and what serves our society for the best and makes the fairest space we can for everyone to communicate and interact with each other online. So with that, I'll stop. Jennifer, thank you again for the invitation. I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm willing to go till 9, and I understand if people aren't. That was so comprehensive and fully bringing us into the thoughtful participation about a regulatory agenda and the values through which that should be evaluated. Implementation in an environment where our government is under attack, where popular democracy is under attack, is obviously an inhibitor. For your closing statement, right now, actually before that, look in the chat. Please own your question and read out just as it is. We don't have too much time. I want the people who wrote those beautiful questions to ask them. Chris thankfully organized them. And then we'll have a little ad lib, but speakers, please do think about this question, how we can support you. I know you have a very nice blog, but we should support you to elucidate more of these slides if possible. And Victor's whole life a lot of it is writing and teaching, and his Center for Equality and Sue is available more on a one-on-one level. So, but if people could please, and know that we're going to meet on May 19th, the Wednesday in 2 weeks, for the Democracy Support Network. So if you have things that you want to actualize, we'll have a little speaking section, and so people can understand how to take actions on this stuff. But how can we support you should be your closing statement. If you have links, please share them. And folks with the questions, please unmute yourself with the first one towards Victor, but could be anyone. Do you see the question for Victor at the top? I think was that Lee?
Yes.
Go ahead. Welcome from Arizona.
Hi. Yeah, it just feels like we have this catch-22, and I'm wondering how we can overcome the fact that our entire mainstream media is corporate owned, and thus we have basically no way to reach the public with the truth. And, of course, our politicians are almost all corporate owned too. So how do we reach the people in significant numbers to make a difference in time to stop and reverse this fast moving undermining of democracy and journalism and all of it together? How do we do that? What's the step? What can we do?
Thank you, Lee. Excellent question. And of course, unfortunately, there's not a simple solution to it, but I think there always has to be a two-pronged approach, which is one, we have to try to create our own media, our own alternative news infrastructure. And many people on this call have been involved with that for many years. But of course, it's not an either or. I mean, as much as we do need to create these different outlets and informational channels, we can't give up on mainstream media. That's where a lot of people get their news and information. And even within these corporate owned outlets, I mean, some are much worse than others. I don't think we should try to get our messages on Fox News, for example, or even cable television is difficult. But there are good journalists out there who, you can reach and you can try to cultivate. And, we should see them as our allies sometimes, even in the commercial sector. So we can't give up on that, but we have Pacifica, we have Democracy Now!, we have all kinds of nonprofit outlets. We do have local public broadcasting stations in many communities. So we do what we can. We also use social media for all of its faults. But the last thing I'll say to that, though, that I think, Lee, you're really underscoring, is that we also have to be realistic. As anyone who's involved with a progressive political project, we're going to face major constraints within our commercial media system. And that's why I keep coming back to this argument that we need structural alternatives. This is a long-term fight. It's not something we'll be able to do tomorrow. But if you think about what the right wing has been able to do, many of the things we take for granted for today were hatched in think tanks 50 years ago. So we gotta think long-term and think about creating an entirely new public media system.
Excellent. And I don't want to preclude the other speakers from these questions, but just dive in a little more. I think that could be Maura's question. Can American journalists, do you want to say it, Maura?
I'm
She
sorry,
left.
I did not give a question. I'm sorry. And I have to leave right now, so. go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm so glad you joined us since you missed the last one. And let's circulate this video widely if the speakers approve of this video. Thank you for being here all the way from Costa Rica. And can American journalists charge Facebook and Google for using the stories of journalists similar to Australia? And what are micropayments? Why don't you like them? I think you can get through that a little quickly.
Yeah, I can rip through these. I mean, the Australia example, that's a really important one that people are pointing to. It's important because many countries around the world, including ours, is beginning to move towards adopting it. And I actually think it sounds great, but it's kind of problematic. It's this idea that, and it sounds fair on its face, which is, well, Facebook and Google are profiting from news media. Why should they just give money back to the publishers? The problem with that is that most of that money is going to go back to people like Rupert Murdoch. And the second part of the problem that with this model that doesn't get enough attention that Chris alluded to earlier is that even if the Facebook and Google duopoly gave all their digital advertising revenue back to the publishers, it wouldn't be enough to support the level of journalism that we need. Revenues were already going down, thanks to Craigslist, thanks to the basic fact that I forgot to mention before, which is digital advertising pays pennies to the dollar of traditional print advertising. That there is the core root of the problem. So it doesn't matter. What I argue, and this is similar to the Superfund proposal that Chris mentioned, I propose that Google and Facebook should put money towards a public media fund, underscore public, not back to the commercial publishers who themselves are complicit in the journalism crisis. I'm sorry, the micropayments is just it's like an iTunes for news. And every year someone comes up with it like they just discovered this idea. And if you think about it, it's not going, we're not going to have like a greatest hits list of our favorite news stories that we're just going to keep paying for, or, it's just not going to work, but it sounds cool.
That sounds fair, as they're selling public data that we get our share as public media.
Hey, Eva, totally. We need something at a large scale to support such a big country and so many localities. Thanks for joining, by the way.
Don't forget me. Because I want to show you that.
Sure, let's throw in one. Can you do a quick one now?
The video? You mean the video?
No. We have to get through questions from the audience. Did you have a question? Your hand's been up forever.
No, not yet.
Okay,
Well,
can we share yours? Let's share it at the end as we network on the way out to get to the questions in the chat. Sue.
Yeah, well, not yet anyway.
Okay. Sue, does someone want to read the question they made for Sue? Does broadcast in the chat?
Let me see if I can find it here.
Does broadcast media include local Fox station?
Yes, it includes the local Fox station, which is different from Fox News. Fox News is a cable affiliate. And just to give you some reference, we think that Fox News has a tremendous influence on our society, and it appears that it does. However, Sean Hannity, on the best night he's ever had on Fox News, got 4 million viewers. Now, I'd like to have 4 million viewers. That would be great. But, Sean Hannity also has a radio show. And any idea how many listeners he gets on his radio show? Try 14 million. Talk radio is far, far more powerful. But your question about local Fox News, your local broadcast affiliate, Fox, which airs football, is treated the same way as any other. They are licensed to broadcast on our publicly owned airwaves. I worked for a Fox affiliate for a time, and they do get some national news feeds from Fox, which is very typical. But they're not the same. So We talked earlier about challenging stations licenses, which is not a track that I recommend unless you really have a serious case. But you can't challenge Fox News with Sean Hannity because it's a cable station. If in your local community you could show that your local Fox station did something egregious, that would be an opportunity for you personally to be able to challenge that license.
Great. And then does someone want to own this next question for Sue? Are there guidelines for the types of information you can request from your local broadcasters?
I don't think there's any guidelines. I mean, just keep in mind that you are talking to the person who has control of the microphones in your local town. One time we went to the Clear Channel station, we requested that we get more progressive talk radio in the Sacramento region. They responded very, very poorly to that. And it was quite interesting after we wrote and published a report, that general manager got fired by Clear Channel. So come up with stuff that actually is real to you and your community. Those are the guidelines. If they're doing something you don't like, if you think that there should be changes, keep it real. But you ask whatever you'd like. Remember, the station belongs to you. The equipment doesn't belong to you, but the airwave does, so own it.
Love. And okay, coming back to Chris, and then it'll be open floor for another 5 minutes or so. Chris, does someone want to read this out?
Oh,
Who wrote how do we increase eyeballs to information-based media sources rather than conspiracy-based sources? How do we increase eyeballs to information-based media sources rather than conspiracy-based sources? Chris, do you want to answer this, or?
Sure, yeah. I guess it's an anonymous question, just like anonymous postings online. Difficult, and I think we need to find different ways to do it. Certainly, we want to continue to encourage and hopefully push the digital platforms to tag and moderate content. That's what Twitter was getting in trouble with the president for. He said it was being censored, but what they were actually doing was they were taking, when they saw conspiracy-based disinformation, and tagging it and saying, you can find out more information about this here. Oh, here are the actual election results. These are the facts. I think that's a good thing if we continue to encourage platforms to do that. And also to make sure that they are using their algorithms in a way that do not promote disinformation or promote conspiracy theories. There's a fallacy out there that Facebook or Twitter have a bias against conservative viewpoints. But really the unfortunate thing is that we're seeing a lot of disinformation coming out from conservative news outlets. And so, having fact checking and having additional information posted when disinformation is put out there, I think is really, really important. And we don't want to take away the power of a platform to moderate that content, because again, if they don't have the power to moderate content and to put out fact-based information or trusted media sources, then who else is going to do it if not the platform? The government certainly cannot. So algorithmic oversight, I think, is increasingly important. We're just figuring out now what that can look like. We've encouraged the government to do a commission or a study around algorithmic accountability and oversight so that it can inform the rest of the government. A commission can inform the entire government about how algorithms work and how you might oversee them or check them for proper use in other contexts, whether it's civil rights contexts or fair housing contexts. I think algorithm oversight is going to be a big part of making sure that platforms aren't taking you down rabbit holes or promoting viral content, which is really what their algorithms are set up to do right now, to keep you on the platform, to make you want to see more and more salacious or outrageous material. And that's really not what algorithms should be used for.
Wow, thank you. So I see George's hand up, and I just, there's so much information in this session. You guys are so well complimented. And I want to encourage Vivian and Terry and Tanya and Susan's and Russell and Rich and Nat. But George, American leader, go for it.
Hold on, before he starts, I'd like to say something.
Okay, yes.
I finally got a question too, so I'd like to be in line as well.
Okay, you can be on the stack.
Alrighty.
Perfect.
One for each of
The shorter we are, the more people we can get to say something quick. George, go ahead.
One for each of them.
Thanks, Jennifer. This has been a great presentation. I appreciate everybody putting out their slides and their thoughts on this. Chris, I wanted to follow up on the question you were just asked. And I had a thought as you were going through what I thought was a really great breakdown of the disrupted media industry. You know, and I kind of agree with that perspective. I hadn't heard it before, but I agree with you that, you know, the media market was disrupted by, as you say, media consolidation, the data-driven interactive platforms, and the democratic lowercase d speech on unlimited channels. But I think it has reached crisis level. I kind of went beyond that when that disrupted market got hijacked by some of the forces you were just talking about. The very focused concentration of very ultra conservative perspectives that we hear in talk radio, through Fox News, on social media, that is, you know, and they focus like a laser beam to promote these conspiracy theories with the intent to divide. That and I think that hijacked what you accurately portrayed as a disrupted marketplace.
Right. I think you're right, George, and I think that's why you're seeing them fight back against normal content moderation and fact checking and you know, efforts to take down disinformation. You know, there are proposals that I think are very dangerous that are ideologically driven content moderation or an effort to push ideologically driven content moderation. The idea that just because you tag something as factually incorrect and deprioritize it because it's promoting something that is conspiracy theory or even worse, you know, tears down the institutions of our society, like falsely reporting on the outcome of an election, you know, that's very dangerous. And so, you know, that shouldn't be viewed as censorship. I think that should be viewed as correct content moderation. And we have, unfortunately, elected officials right now who want to say that that is censorship somehow, and that that we need to take action against platforms. I think there's a lot of regulating of digital platforms that need to happen around their algorithms, around their anti-competitive practices, but content moderation is not one of them. We need to promote better content moderation.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, would you like to formulate your question now, please?
Yeah, I got one for each of the three.
Can you just do one question, because we would like to give others a chance?
All right, I'll do Victor. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, buddy.
Victor, I want to know why you. Hold on, I gotta find it because I know I put it in the comments section. I asked him.
Is it about the Fairness Doctrine?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, I'm not against it. It's just that it's become sort of a shorthand for, like, this is what we need. This will solve the problem, especially around Tucker Carlson and Fox News. And there are a couple problems with it. It's a longer conversation. I actually wrote a piece for the Washington Post a few months ago where I tried to lay out this kind of nuanced, which might have been a mistake, but I tried to show that I do think it's something we should be talking about. We shouldn't forget about the Fairness Doctrine. We should learn lessons from it, but it's not like we could just slap it onto Fox News. First of all, it only pertained to broadcast media. So we would have to completely rewrite it to apply to cable outlets, and everyone I've talked to, like people like Andrew Schwartzman, we saw him in Sue's clip earlier, just told me legally we can't really do that as much as we might want to. And then finally, I think for many of these problems, they are these structural problems, so that we can't just have regulatory fixes. It's really about creating reliable news sources. You know, it's like a supply problem. So that's why I try to not go the route where it's just like Fairness Doctrine it did cause a lot of problems. Rush Limbaugh did happen because of the fairness, we lost the Fairness Doctrine. There's no question about that, but we can't just bring it back to solve our problems today. And especially for social media outlets, I don't know how we could ever do that.
Can you share that link?
Can I piggyback on that? Can I piggyback on that for just a second, please?
Yes, real quick. Yep, let's do. Thank you.
I actually worked under the Fairness Doctrine and have seen what happened with it. And I agree with you, Victor, but I think that we do in broadcasting anyway need a right to respond. If a radio host goes on the radio and attacks me personally, I ought to be able to go on that radio station and have the right to respond. I think that talk radio has trained their minions to fight against the Fairness Doctrine. But if we can change our language and start talking about the very simple right to respond, I think we can get a little farther down the road.
I agree with that. I'd be fine with bringing it back for broadcast media, right? Like it should have never been thrown out in the first place. But my point was simply that it's not going to solve some of the problems that we wanted to solve. But I'm totally with you, Sue.
Do you think you mentioned a link? You mentioned an article that you wrote. Do you think you could share that with us?
And thank you, Jeffrey, for your question. And any other burning questions, as Victor we're going to make a package of things from these guests in an email that we want to share widely. And we also want to share widely the recording because there's so much information. Any burning question, because I want to get to the final closing statement that I asked. Please, a woman.
Well, wait.
No, sorry, excuse me.
Sorry.
I would like to have someone else going. Kendra, Karen. And so to the final, and you can always write us the question and we'll give them through. How can we support you? All three of you. And anything you want to share in closing.
Can I share something?
Can you hold off until a little bit later in the program?
Yeah, but I hope all three of them are still here for when I want to show the video.
Okay. Sue, you're on. Your screen is on, so you first.
Okay, well, again, thank you so much. And I have been so enlightened by Chris Lewis and Victor Pickard. I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to be here tonight. I'm old school. I keep talking about broadcasting because we own it. But I think that there's a long way we can go in our communities just by owning what we have and then reaching out into these areas that, I mean, Chris Lewis, boy, did you enlighten me. And so much that my brain kind of exploded at times. This is wonderful, wonderful information. It really does take all of us involved in this, though. And as more people get aware of these issues, even if we're talking about internet issues, you know, these are the kinds of things that the more people who are aware of it and involved, the more impact we can really have. In terms of how to support me, you know, I'm self-funded here. I don't have a foundation or an organization behind me. I would probably like to join one. You can go to my webpage, SueWilsonReports.com. You can buy a copy of Broadcast Blues. That helps a little bit. Occasionally people will give donations. At this point though, you know, just let's work together to do some really good work. I will say this, I am looking for people who live in communities where Sinclair Broadcasting is operating. There is a really big story that I'm working on that I'm not going to say a whole lot about it. I will say that the lawsuit we have pending at the District Court of Appeals right now with the FCC, it's a Freedom of Information Act request. We think there's some hidden documents It can be very illuminating. But if you live in an area with Sinclair Broadcasting, I would like to hear from you. You can write me at mediaactioncenter.net. And I did put that into the chat. Thank you. Blessings to you all.
You are wonderful, and everything that I had to do with you was wonderful. Victor?
Sure. First, I just want to start by thanking everyone. Again, this has been a fabulous discussion. Thank you, Jennifer, for organizing this. And I'm so glad to finally meet Sue and Chris, whom I've heard both about so much. My previous pre-academic life, I worked at Free Press, and I was in Washington, D.C. And so, you know, I've been hearing about you for many years. I'm a huge fan. And in terms of support, I mean, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, I spend most of my time writing. So if you could just read what I write, that's all that you can find most of it online for free. If you're able to buy books, that's great. But I don't make money from the books. Like, I make pennies on every book that I sell, and I don't sell that many books. But just to read my stuff and engage with it and let me know what you think is all that I would ask for. And if you want to follow, I spend far too much time on Twitter, so you can find me there if you're interested in some of my rants. But thank you all. Please, everyone, keep up the work, the activism, and the conversations.
Thank you. Christopher?
Great. Oh man, this is a fun group. I really enjoyed also getting to meet Victor and Sue. So I hope we stay in touch, you guys, because I love what you had to say and what you shared. You can support Public Knowledge, my organization, putting the link in the chat, publicknowledge.org. And you know, certainly read our stuff. Follow us on Twitter and social media. You know, go to our YouTube channel, where we put out videos, not only videos of where we answer questions about policy, but videos where we have topics, panel discussions, short clips from congressional hearings about some of these really important questions that we're talking about today. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're a great place to find. I see the question in here about public utility and the internet. I'm testifying on Thursday in front of the House Energy and Commerce Committee about closing the digital divide and equity with broadband. We believe broadband should be a utility, and what that means when you label a utility, you know, goes to the rights that you have. But broadband is not the internet. It's just how you get the internet. And so it's a deeper conversation to talk about the internet as a public utility that gets much more challenging. So we could do a whole episode on our YouTube channel about that. But reach out to us, let us know what you're interested in, and we really appreciate your support.
You all are awesome. Thank you, audience. Thank you, speakers. And you're welcome to hang out and watch Jeffrey's video, and or if you have to go, some of you have gone already. And well, what can I say? Yeah, this is too amazing what we learned today. I'm gonna watch it twice more. So thank you for being learners of this important topic and sharers. Good night. Thank you. And some of your proceeds will go for some of the speakers. Some have donated their proceeds. And I really appreciate you doing that, buying into this Eventbrite. Some people gave $1, some people gave $25. It was very nice. Thank you.
Hey, someone just entered the waiting room.
We're all back. Bye, everybody. If anyone else wants to stay around and talk, we can. How long is your thing, Jeffrey?
Well, I know that. Well, I did mention in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I did the calculations. So the crimes against journalism thing is 26 minutes, while the democracy one is 2 hours and 21 minutes. But I don't think you want to see that long one.
Why don't you send them to me? We can include them in the bottom of the email from the speakers. Would that be a solution?
Well, we can see the 26-minute, but not the 2-hour one.
I got a pack. I'm going away for the first time since COVID, substantially.
Oh, so we don't have 26 minutes at least?
No.
Well, maybe I can.
Oh, you guys are so great. They're waiting for you, Jeffrey. Do you want to say anything to before we all say bye and good night? It's
can't.
9:04. I'm gonna close this off.
So I can't.
Let's
share.
stay in touch, okay?
Oh, so I can't share.
We've got to go now. We have kids. We have responsibilities. Thank
All
you,
right.
though, and we love your energy. Keep going, Jeffrey.
Let me at least say something.
Thank you all so much, so very, very much. And thank you, Jeffrey, for your interest and energy. Please do put your stuff in the chat, and I know Jennifer is going to send us around, and it's just marvelous. Thank you, Chris. You were illuminating. I think Victor's gone. Jennifer, you're a saint. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you for
Good night
teaching
now.
me how to be a nicer person. Janice, hi Janice. I didn't see you before and I haven't met you yet. Are you on the call with as a guest with someone, as a part of the guest, or have you signed up for our event? I didn't notice your name previously. Do you want to say hi? Janice has to unmute.
I know I did. I know I said I gave them in the comments section the link to the YouTube video.
Okay, we're gonna save the chat and I'm gonna share the chat with everyone.
Okay, it's in the
In
top.
fact, thank you for reminding me to save the chat. I forgot last time and it was a disaster.
It's at the top of the chat, near the
Okay,
top.
I can't look right now because I'm saying bye. Nat, Michael, thank you, Janice, thank you all.
Just
Alan
want to let
from
you know where it was
Wisconsin.
so it can narrow down your search.
Where's Brian W from?
Okay.
Iris, where are you from? Do you guys want to unmute?
I'm from Los Angeles.
Oh yes.
And, my sister Terry told me about it, and I love the brainwashing of my dad. And the
brainwashing of your dad.
I'll tell you about it later, Mom.
Okay.
You should show it to your mom because it's great.
You know what? I think she's seen it.
Oh, okay, okay.
Let me say that. Yeah, I was just interested, and I'm a political activist, so I'm finding it hard to fight the misinformation. We're losing races here because of disinformation, and it's really quite a tool. So that's part of why my interest.